Welcome back everyone to another Mythfall devlog. If you're new to the channel, I'm building a browser-based bullet hell MMO from scratch in Golang and documenting the process along the way. This time, like every time, I worked on a lot of different stuff, including my very first contribution to Go. So let's jump right in and I'll let you know what I did. Alright, one of the first tasks that I worked on was updating this Twilight Forest area boss. The original one wasn't that good and it was super easy to cheese because people would just stand here and just like shoot it with a crossbow and stay out of range of its it did this like spinny attack thing. So that's a little bit more interesting. As you attack this, it kind of shoots out these big rings just to show that it is a boss. Because a lot of people were confused. They thought it was just a chest they had to destroy. And the goal of this pattern was like they need to weave in and out and also rotate. That's kind of the challenge here. So I'll do my best to do it while I talk. But then yeah, you can basically just attack it along the way. And I think that there are some sections where that happens as well too. So yeah, that's this change done. But yeah, this was one of the most, a lot of people were complaining that this wasn't a very fun fight, so I tried to make it a little bit more fun. But eventually this boss will drop a dungeon, so it needs to be a fairly challenging fight, because this will be one of the harder dungeons to drop. Or this will be one of the like first 5 skull dungeons, I guess, will drop from this guy eventually. But that wasn't out of this patch, that'll be added maybe next patch actually, so yeah, we'll have to see. Sorry, the Vengeful Spirit, that's what it's called. Then on the desert side, I added a few new monsters that you can fight against while you're in the desert. Like, for example, this blue scorpion's one of the new ones. This guy was always there. This guy was always there. The green one kind of does this, like, spin out attack thing, which is kind of cool, I think. And I had the concept of, like, these roaming, I guess you could call them, like, mini bosses, but that might be too strong of a word. They're, like, elites, I guess. But they basically just have a little bit higher of a drop rate. And this black one is an example of that. So he's a little bit more challenging, has a little bit more health, has a higher drop rate for the main resource of this biome. So if you kill him, you'll have a higher chance of getting a drop. But yeah, I think that this makes the desert a little bit more interesting because originally it just had. Also, I love this little effect where like kind of they zigzag with each other. The problem with the desert was there was only 2 monsters and one of them just stood still. It was the where are you? It was this guy and he doesn't move at all. So it was a really boring biome to farm. So hopefully this will make it a little bit more engaging for people. And yeah, that is that change done. And we got some gold. Then I added a new dungeon called the Cool Crab Grotto, which is one of the it's a really easy one. It's kind of a joke of a dungeon a little bit, just because it's like these EDM lights and stuff like that. It was actually really hard to get these animations to synchronize with all of the little tiles, but I eventually got that working. I just had to have a global timer that kind of tracked the animation for each of these entities. But anyway, so that looks kind of cool. And then it's just filled with a lot of cool crabs with their nice colored shades. And it's a short dungeon. It's mostly to, or the objective of this dungeon is just to get early game players like a little bit of gear, so they can do the harder content, and kind of learn about the like patterns of the game because the main pattern is going into dungeons, getting drops, stuff like that. So it's got a little bit of exploratory, just like the Pirate Cove is, where it's just an easy dungeon that gives you a little bit of stuff and a little bit of crafting resources. And they learn about shields and stuff like that too. So, and the nice ambience of lighting. But I think this boss fight's actually kind of fun. He just kind of like comes at you and like resonates these rings, and they're fairly hard to dodge. So you're almost guaranteed to get hit by one of them, I think. And then he randomly will select another attack, but he has one other attack in his queue that shoots like musical notes around. There it is. Basically, just spawns these like musical note projectiles, which I thought was kind of cool. So you gotta dodge these guys in a little bit of like micro dodging kind of way. But yeah, if you kill him, he's got like an interesting drop table where he'll just drop like a little bit of random items. He also has a few boss items that drop at a little bit lower of a drop rate. So yeah, so that's this dungeon. And then the next dungeon that I added was the Ancient Ruins. This is a 3 skull dungeon. It appears that this area boss, which is the what did I call him? The automaton guardian. It's kind of like automaton theme. So there's like these automatons in this ancient ruins that you have to go in and kill, and you basically go through and kill them. This also introduces the first usage of projectiles that stun you. So for example, I'm stunned now and you can see that there's a little star above my head, so I can't move at all. So you can get stunned now in this dungeon. That's one of the new interesting additions for this one. And this boss isn't super complicated. There's only these 3 attacks. Let's fight this mini boss really quickly. And yeah, he'll drop the dungeon and then he drops kind of just like a random resource. Then we have the Ancient Ruins. This will be the drop location of the Dexterity Crystal. Originally, I was trying to make a 2 skull dungeon, but I ended up kind of upping it in difficulty just to make it a 3 skull. But it's kind of on the easier side of a 3 skull dungeon, I'd say. That's not as hard as like Anubis or the Succubus dungeon. but it's also not super easy. Then you have these different automatons that have each have their own little attack, and like you have the stunner guy here. This guy just kind of like stays away, or these guys just stay away and attack you. But we'll run through this guy really quickly, and we'll try to find the boss. I'm using my cheat sword just to make it a little bit faster. I think that's an interesting pairing because what'll happen a lot of times, but you'll get stunned, and then the beam guy will just beam at you, and you'll just take tons of damage. So there's a little bit of difficult interactions between these automatons. So I think that creates kind of interesting synergies with them. Which that's the beam guy. These guys are the beam guys. So yeah, like you'll get stunned and then you'll be stuck and then you just get beam weaponed the entire time. So you can take quite a lot of damage, especially if there's multiple stun guys. You just get stun locked sometimes, so it can be a little bit tricky. But it's definitely not super duper hard. But I'd say it's a pretty fun one. That's my objective. Because originally, I would make dungeons that would be kind of hard, but not fun ways. So I'm trying to make the dungeons more fun rather than just being like hard and annoying ways. I'm trying to make them hard in fun ways, I guess, which is obviously a tough balance to strike. But I think I am getting better at designing these things. That's a nice like sign, I think. So hopefully I'll be able to make more and more interesting like itemizations and different monsters and stuff like that. So, and hopefully the boss will be just around this corner. There he is. Okay, so this is the Automaton Destroyer. He has a few different phases that he cycles through, just like kind of like a patrol phase. This also introduces the I don't know if you saw a little taunt above his head. He'll just like print out some text that he's like saying something kind of to you. I think that makes it a little bit more lore wise interesting, and it also adds like a little bit of like nice feel to the fight, I think. So for example, like initiate scanning sequence, and he kind of shoots out these like laser beams that you could maybe misconstrue as a scan. So, but they are projectiles; they will hurt you. But yeah, that's basically it for this dungeon. I'm not gonna go through and kill them all the way through. I'll let you guys do that, and yeah, we will hop back and talk about the next thing. All right, this week I also added status effects to the game, which I think will add a lot of interesting like itemization because let's say I make an item that like reduces your chance of being stunned, and then I have a status effect where you might get stunned in a dungeon. So then there's like this little like interesting decision that the player has to make of do I want to take the item that like helps me get like prevents me from getting stunned, or do I want to take this other item? So I think that'll open up some opportunities there. But for implementation on status effects, for the networking portion, I decided to do a status mask, or it's just like basically a bit mask. And every single index of that bit mask basically represents a different status effect that could be there. Because I did kind of plan to have a lot of different status effects added to the game. So this will simplify the networking quite a bit. And then for every single status effect, I'll have a certain timer slot for it in the non-networking part where we'll just track to see if the status effect has been like removed. So we basically decrement this timer per each status effect and then decide if it needs to be removed or not. Like once the timer hits 0, we'll just remove the status effect from the bit mask and then network that back to the player. So it's pretty simple plumbing wise. There's also some additions in terms of how it's displayed to the user. So for example, shield is a status effect. So if you look at any of the, some of the boss fights will have shields in them, and I'll just draw a shield overlaid on top of them. That's a little bit nicer than having like a little like tooltip icon pop above the player. But for some status effect, it's kind of hard to represent. So I'll just draw a little icon above the player. So for example, I got stunned there, and you can see that there's a little star. But yeah, so that's one method. I just show the icon above them, and then the other method is I'll just draw like a little overlay sprite to show that they're shielded or frozen or something like that. So that is status effects. I also spent a lot of time reworking how items are represented. Yeah, so the new items struct looks kind of like this, where it's just an item struct that has item type inside of it. But then I have an old item struct, and what it used to look like was it would have the equipment type embedded inside of the item. This made it really painful because then I had separate item types depending on what equipment type you were. So kind of this like fan out of like every equipment type has its own set of item types. And that was just really complicated to write like generic code that would operate on item type specifically. So what I ended up doing was just removing the equipment type and embedding it inside of the item config, which gets looked up. So basically the item type is just an ID for a database. I look up the item config based off of the item type, and then I can tell what type of equipment it is. So I do it that way now. This was a little bit of work just because the database had to be kind of updated to match this. So I had to migrate, or I have to migrate data over. But overall, it was pretty easy to get it working. I don't think there was any issues too in the migration, which I was a little bit surprised by. I expected there to be like something that went wrong, but nothing went wrong, which is nice. So yeah. And then The last thing I'll talk about for items is one of the big requests that people were making was that they didn't know where to get things. So I added this little in the bottom right hand corner of the tooltip for items. I now show where you can find that item. And some items are like biome specific. So for example, the beach biome drops coconuts when you kill monsters. It also drops these. But then some items are boss specific. For example, the iron throwing knife comes from Stoneheart Forest. That's like the only place to get it from. So I basically just build this reverse lookup map to see which dungeons drop which items, and then I can take an item and find out which dungeon drops it. So that's that change. Hopefully that'll help people better understand where they can find items when they look at the blacksmith and they want to craft this something. They'll be able to just hover over and tell where they need to go to farm that item. And it's not so specific to where it like removes any of the mystery or to where it removes all of the mystery, but it's not generic enough to where they have like no idea what it is, you know? So that's a nice balance that we found here. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. So some of the week I spent, or some of the time I spent in this sprint was improving performance. So I did a lot of like little minor things. I won't go into too much detail about them, but for example, on some low-end devices, I was having some fill rate issues. So I improved that by basically sorting the sprites so that they would draw from front to back for the opaque sprites. So that way fragments can be culled earlier on in the rendering process, which helps some of the lower end devices. So that improved, like, for example, my laptop, which just uses an embedded GPU on the CPU. That was able to decrease the frame time by about like 4 milliseconds, which was nice. So I think there's some improvements there. I think there's still a lot I can do in that area, but there are a lot of like particles and projectiles that spawn in this game. So there's definitely some optimization still out there, but hopefully this will improve it a little bit. There's also some like little minor things like UI layering issues where if you scaled the window down quite a lot, it would cause the like different panels in the UI layer to like all overlap. So I fixed that by just putting them on separate layers and improved some of the text rendering too, where it would be like scaled like 0.6 or something like that, which would make it offset on the pixel grid, making it kind of like a little bit wonky looking. We can talk about the Go contribution that I did now. Basically, when I was doing some investigations on allocation rate for my WASM binary, I've kind of found there was these one function that came from two functions, but this is in syscall/js package. And there's this one function I was doing a lot of the allocation. So as you can see, it's like 40%. I wanted to optimize it. So I ended up finding this ticket that someone named Finbear had opened, and he actually did like all of the research in terms of like how to solve this, and he even opened a pull request himself to solve it. So I won't go into like too much detail about what it is, but basically he didn't want to work on it anymore because I guess he switched over to Rust, sadly. But yeah, Finbear suggested that someone takes over this task and tries to get into the Go mainline source tree. I decided to help out and do that. So I opened a pull request here with the changes. We can go through those really quickly. There's basically two changes that needed to be put together to improve the allocation rate. The first one is the fact that this is a syscall library, so it basically transmits data from the Go world to the JavaScript world. And in my case, it's for mostly doing WebGL calls. So I basically need to like copy over vertex buffers and things like that so that WebGL can render them. So in the copy of that data, the Go compiler loses the ability to track certain pieces of data. So it doesn't know that, for example, this string doesn't escape to the heap anywhere after this function gets called because the implementation for this function is in JavaScript. So I basically did an investigation for each of these functions and tracked all the JavaScript code to make sure that this reference to this string wasn't maintained by JavaScript anywhere. But basically most of the time, things like strings and slices are just copied over to a different data segment in the JavaScript world. So we were able to add no escape flags there, and this better helps the Go compiler optimize the need to heap allocate certain things. So yeah, so then the second change that gets paired with is when we build these argument slices. This is the like list of arguments that gets passed over to a particular JavaScript function that we're trying to call. Like when we make an OpenGL call, we have a list of arguments we pass over. So this basically creates a list of like JavaScript references to those arguments. And the optimization here is basically that the Go compiler is able to stack allocate slices if the slice length is constant. So basically for less than 16 JavaScript arguments, we will just allocate a slice that is length 16, which is the majority of like all JavaScript functions probably. It's definitely the less than any WebGL function that I need uses, but if it does go over that size, we'll just do a regular heap allocation for it. But for the most part, this reduces a lot of the allocation. So these will get stack allocated now. But for the code review process, it was pretty easy. Most of the requests from the reviewers was just to add things like documentation. Like when I originally pushed it or opened the pull request, I didn't have like these messages up here explaining what was going on. So they asked for things like that. They also asked for some unit tests. So I added one for each of those in the JavaScript like test file as well. Basically for the 3 functions that you can call to send or like to make executions on the JavaScript side. But yeah, I just basically go through and make all of the calls and then check the number of allocations that happen and verify that the number of allocations is correct. So for example, for small lengths of arguments 0 to 16, we expect to have 1 allocation, or 3 if we are greater than 16. So yeah, so I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, and this does decrease a lot of my allocation problems. This basically removes this entire chunk of allocations from my game, which is quite a good improvement. But yeah, I think most of the credit for this should probably go to Finbear for original work. So thank you, Finbear, for figuring all of this out. And yeah, I was just there kind of like shepherding it through the code review process. So anyways, I'm happy to have this in because the allocation rate for WebAssembly is way, way higher than my allocation rate for the original like Linux binary, for example. So it's a nice improvement to have. And I think this will make it into Go 1.23. That's at least the milestone it got added to. So I assume that's what that means. So yeah, I guess we'll have to wait till I think it's like August before we can use this. But yeah. Anyways, I think that is pretty much everything that we worked on this week. So yeah, I hope you guys try out the game and let me know what you think. As always, an absolutely massive thank you to all the supporters on YouTube, Twitch, GitHub, and Patreon. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.